So I think, so in terms of my pedagogy, I mean, I think that that's changed a lot over the last few years in particular. I taught for a few years doing kind of short-term contracts and honestly didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about pedagogy or assessment. I just kind of like did what I knew, and what I knew was what I had learned. And so when I first went into a classroom where I started really thinking about these things, I realized that, in the time that had gone since I was in high school to when I was teaching now, like the world had changed. Social media had blown up, internet had brought in new things. And I just, was coming to this realization that like I can't teach the way that I was taught, no matter how much. I just kind of wanted to teach the way that I had learned when I was younger, because I was somebody who grew up wanting to be a teacher, who spent my whole school career watching teachers because I just wanted to be one. And I really loved school. And so to me, my educational experiences were like, yeah, that's what school's going to look like as a teacher. And then, I quickly realized like that's not the case. It's very different being on the other side. And so in terms of assessment, when I first started, so I teach high school ELA is my main area. And when I first started assessing students, I was in my first couple of years, I was in survival. I'd pull rubrics from the internet. I would pull rubrics from other people's assignments. I'd pull rubrics from the copy room that someone left behind, just like pulling things from resources from wherever you can get them. And I would use them, and, I'd put them up against an assignment, and I'd think to myself like, yep, this assignment or this assessment is for a literary essay. It makes sense that I will use this for my literary essay. And then I just started to realize that like my instruction and my assessment weren't matching up. So what I would notice is that, I'd be assessing a student and I'd look at it and think, this is a really good paper. Why is it only scoring a 70%? Or this is a really crappy paper. Why is it scoring a 90%? But when you line it up on the, on a rubric, it's like, well, yeah, they did do this at a, 3 out of 4, 4 out of 4 level. So that's what they earned. And so I really started to question kind of like, why do we assess the way we do? How do we align our rubrics so that they actually are intertwined with the instruction? Because I think we often look at assessment and instruction as two separate parts, but they're not. They're intertwined. They go together. And so while planning instruction, we need to be planning assessment and vice versa. And I just started to realize that even though I was trying really hard to make rubrics, match up, they still weren't telling a whole story. They weren't telling a story about a student's abilities. They weren't telling a story about a student's knowledge. All they were telling me was that a student was compliant with the things on the list of the rubric, right? Which we as education students and teachers are all familiar with. How many times have you done an assignment, looked at the 4 out of the 4 on the rubric and said, okay, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this, and didn't reach beyond that at all, right? So at this point, I kind of started my, I don't know what I would call like a deep dive into assessment and what I'm really doing in the classroom, and, how authentic my assessment is. And I started questioning, I don't know, just like our grading system in general, and saying like, why do we do this? Because this kid earned an 82 on this rubric. This kid earned an 87. Is there a difference between them? I'm not really sure, but this kid's going to get a scholarship and this kid isn't. So, but what's the real difference here, right? So I started really questioning my grading practices.